This week on the Road to Cinema podcast, we join Oscar-winning directors T.J. Martin and Daniel Lindsay for a conversation about their new documentary, LA92, which premiered at this year's Tribeca Film Festival and is available now to watch on demand through Nat Geo, as well as through Hulu, Amazon Instant Video, and iTunes. Using archival footage and an original music score, LA92 tells the story of the aftermath of the Rodney King verdict in the city of Los Angeles through the uprising that took place in the days and weeks following. The film also explores the social and racial context that had developed in South Los Angeles through the community's relationship with the LAPD, which dated back to the 1960s. We'll delve into a detailed conversation about documentary filmmaking and how archival footage can be an immersive tool for telling a story. TJ and Daniel also have a candid conversation about what it means to be a documentary filmmaker and how their careers changed after winning Oscars for Best Documentary Feature for the 2012 Academy Awards, that film being Undefeated, which chronicled an inner-city high school football team in Memphis, Tennessee, which is now available on Netflix. For more information on the Road to Cinema podcast, please visit jogroadproductions.com. Don't forget you can subscribe to Jog Road Productions on YouTube and check out some of our video interviews with Don Cheadle, Ewan McGregor, Greta Gerwig, Moon Zappa, and many more. Follow us on Twitter at Jog Road, Instagram, Jog Road Productions, like our Jog Road Productions Facebook page, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button on iTunes for the Road to Cinema podcast. And also on iTunes, you can write us a nice review under the iTunes podcast page for the Road to Cinema podcast. And now for a detailed conversation on documentary filmmaking and their new film, LA92, Oscar-winning directors T.J. Martin and Daniel Lindsay. So I wanted to start off by talking about why you guys decided to take this very specific approach with the LA riots, with the Rodney King verdict, to focus on archival material and to tell the story primarily and uniquely just through that material.
I think from the start, we have a background in more verite style documentary filmmaking, so we're always looking for something that has a little bit more of an active storyline, and we kind of tend to avoid material that requires you to kind of look at it in retrospect. We have talking heads kind of, for one, it's through a specific filter, and you are almost distanced from the experience of the film. And two, you're looking at things in reverse. So the reason we kind of took that approach, well, first we should say that the producers, Simon and Jonathan Shin, had already set up the film with National Geographic, and they were looking for, it was already set up and they were looking for directors. And so when they came to us, they had already kind of put together like a sizzle reel of just to try to basically court us. And in that, we had seen a lot of footage that, at the time, during the, 92 unrest, we were both in middle school. So it was stuff, in revisiting that sizzle reel, there was material just we hadn't seen before or stuff we'd forgotten about. But there was a specific moment of a gentleman who's in the film, who's wielding the hammer. He's saying, this is not right. I come from the ghetto too. This gentleman by the name of Arthur Washington.
That was a very powerful scene. As his business was being destroyed, and he was trying to extend an olive branch out to people.
Extend an olive branch, or he was basically having a meltdown in front of camera. And that, for us, that emotional candor was kind of like, if we can preserve that, the integrity of the humanity in that moment, then maybe we're looking at these events and revisiting them in a different light than what has been done in the past. And so the idea was, well, maybe we just construct it with no voices, and you just contextualize it through materials that were at your disposal at that time, and just try to again preserve every facet of every clip, and it's kind of the integrity of what it was without clouding it too much, but not avoiding the basic kind of beats of the storyline and kind of the basic elements of how we got to that place and how those events transpired. That was the idea. Then setting out to go do that was a whole other ballgame.
And did you guys know what materials that you would have access to and what you could license and what was out there in a general way?
Well, we didn't know. We didn't know what would be there. I mean, we kind of had an assumption, but we didn't, in terms of what broadcast stuff would exist. But we didn't know in terms of like personal home video, what kind of like radio stuff. Surprisingly, radio is really difficult. Like, there's not a lot of archive of radio. And yeah, no, we didn't. I mean, there was definitely a bit of it of like jumping off a building and hoping your parachute opens.
Because the news footage, you can go to archive vendors and find that, but to find radio materials,
even the archive, like, so if you like go to ABC News Source and you make a request for stuff related to the LA riots, they're gonna send you a 45-minute clip reel that has like their like quote unquote best of B-roll and the little moments that you've seen everywhere.
So they're not gonna like dig deep for you and find what you.
And then so we would have to keep pressing them back. Like, 'cause the thing we're really going for is like unaired raw tapes, which is, I don't know, on its face seems like, they've got their archive, they've got their tapes, but it's way more difficult. Even like places that will send you, I don't want to get too in the weeds of like of this, but like, places that will send you maybe one raw tape and then you go to license the moments and they're like, oh, you can't use that. And you've already built the film. You're like, why can't you? Well, we just changed our policy that now you can't use anything that wasn't aired. Like, we had that happen a couple times. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of wandered. I don't know if I answered the question or not, but
well, I mean, it's such like, because the film is made up of all of this unique material. So the search for it, using it, implementing it. I mean, it just must be kind of a frustrating process.
It's an extremely frustrating process, but at the same time, the intent was not to make a journalistic endeavor, right? This is the 25th year anniversary, and first of all, that had been done before, and we also knew that there's probably going to be other either films or TV specials or something that are always kind of usually taking a deconstructive, like, this happened, and this is how we arrived at this place. For us, it was, from a creative standpoint, that's not of interest, and two, there's potentially a level of being irresponsible by doing that way, because you're then telling the audience that's the definitive reasons as to why American society arrived to this place of one of the most destructive moments in American history. There's a lot more at play than just what you can fit in a 90-minute film. So for us, as difficult as it was to try to find the materials, the liberating facet of it was, if you just have the basic tenets of the story beats, what we're actually looking at is American society and how people react during those moments. So the liberating part is, we thought of it more as like a symphony. Like, can we just create a space and the film moves in like symphonic movements, and it's almost like an opera. And what you're looking at, you're more holding up a mirror to American society than you are saying, I need every single nick and cranny of the story beat of all the things happening during the civil unrest. Versus, if I hit this story beat, but I can see how people are reacting to this, for example, the release of the Tasha Harmon's murder. How is the Korean community reacting to it? How is the African American community reacting? How is government reacting to it? How is law enforcement reacting to it? And that's kind of really what the film is this inner cutting and interweaving between a variety of different communities and perspectives surrounding the events. So there's something kind of liberating about that, because anything can really be a nugget, like something really special.
I think that's, TJ said earlier that, we come from more of a verite background, and we're more interested in that style of, in terms of documentary filmmaking. We're more interested in that style, and there's something, when you're shooting verite doc, you miss moments, and you there's some parallel there, like where you beat yourself up because you missed a moment, or you didn't, but then you have to remember, the audience never knows
what that
happened.
Yeah.
And so there's a similarity or a parallel to this. Yes, we would have wanted every piece of footage, but in some respects you're tied to what you can get, and then you have to make the film out of that. The struggle with this is was there going to be enough to provide a proper amount of context so that it just wasn't, and it didn't become exploitative, where you're just taking extremely provocative moments and images and putting them in a way that is just provocative without any substance behind it. And that was the real challenge.
At what point early on in that process did you have a solid structure of what the whole of the movie would be? And even, at a point using music score, which is, very dominant in the film and very powerful.
I mean, the structure, we, like most, I think, people use note cards for, to represent scenes, and we'll structure out our film on a board while we're editing. I would say we moved.
And it gets rearranged a million times.
But this was this has the least amount of movement of the cards, because it was just
we're not rewriting history.
Yeah, it was history, and we also were pretty adamant about not cheating anything. So for the most part, there's nothing that is out of order in the presentation of the material, or there's nothing that we're using to represent. Maybe here and there's a fire that we're showing that might be from earlier in the day than what we're showing, but so yeah, there wasn't a lot of structural thing. It was more the molding in the edit, like you're saying, getting the pacing and the structure within moments down, and that was a whittling thing, and it was also throwing shit against the wall. The music was, from the beginning, we knew that we were gonna it was gonna be very important, and that we wanted to do a symphonic score, and we pulled a ton of references and cut to those, but the final music by Danny and Sander is some of it matches kind of what we had in there, and then others is them just kind of taking inspiration from what they saw. But yeah, the music is, in terms of structure, we knew from the outset that it was going to be extremely important, making it a cohesive piece, because obviously we're using all of these disparate pieces of material to try and string along a narrative.
It's really, it's certainly a big facet of it's almost like the glue of the whole film, and you don't really want music to be the driving force to the point where it's feel this, but in this case it kind of has to, so it has to be done really tastefully, so it's in a weird way, it's heightening the tension, but you don't want to overstep your boundaries. So to their credit, I think they really understood what we were going for and found a really interesting space, with the music being really the director of the film, and it also reminds you of what type of film you're watching. It reminds you that you're in an experience and not waiting for something to settle down, and I'm just going to settle into this scene.
Yeah, it's very immersive.
It's extremely immersive, and it just kind of keeps moving. I think we're the first to admit that it's an exhausting film. A friend of ours watched a rough cut and said something to the effect of, it's an inescapable conflict of emotions. That's the experience of watching the film. I thought that was very accurate.
How long was that rough cut that you had made at that point?
Oh man, This is probably the shortest. Our roughs were not as long as our first rough.
Well, no, we did. Well, it's because we created this in such
like sections.
Piecemeal.
Yeah.
But like sections were really long.
Yeah, you'd have like the verdict scene, like the release of the announcement of the verdict, that leads all the way down to night one. I mean, the first iteration of just the announcement of the verdict leading to the flashpoint of Florence and Normandy was like 45 minutes, 50 minutes. It was compelling. There's no way that could be in the film that long. But, that was in cutting that, knowing that was kind of like the nucleus of the experience of the film. Like, can you sustain interest in that space? Can you sustain tension in that space? Even though most people go into it know what's going to happen, can you actually get to the point where there's no lead character, there's no you're not following a singular journey, but can you attach yourself to the way in which communities are reacting to it? And that was, I think, one of the first things we cut, where we realized this is 3 months into the edit. We're like, okay, if we can do this for the rest of the film, this will work. And it was like a 45-minute epic.
When you guys have long sequences like that are 45 minutes in the rough cut, how do you go about refining it and pulling back and trying to get to the core of what the moments are?
Try not to fall in love with that stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think there's I think there's how is I don't want to say that you don't have we obviously have very specific ideas, and we put a shit ton of thought into every moment that is on screen, but paradoxically you also are just going with what feels right, you kind of strip, you experiment and what happens if you take this away? What happens if you smash these two moments together? Oh shit, those two things say more than the last. Now we can get rid of that 5 minutes there. But it's not like you can step back and look at it and just be like, do this, and this, and then we're done. And maybe some people work like that. I don't know. But our process is way more. It's not like trial and error, again, without thought. There's an extreme amount of thought that goes into everything, but then there is just also let's operate from a place of feeling. What does it feel like to move this there? Or what does it feel like to just take this? There was we originally went right, or not originally, when doing one of our rough cuts, we put two scenes next to each other, and we went right from the Reginald Denny beating to it just happened to cut against a scene of a woman looking to try to get back to her apartment because she thought her kids were there, and she was right at Florence and Normandy, but it was nighttime now, and it was such a weird contrast to go from this extremely visceral, heightened, violent scene to this really simple human scene. Now, we didn't ultimately end up doing that in the film because we had to show that Parker Center ended up, in downtown LA. We had a responsibility to the story itself but that was that was an accident that was really instructive to us of we can smash cut later on in the film between two moments, and they will bring more meaning to the audience than maybe we could have sat with a pencil and paper outlining what that would have been.
Yeah, but the general process is we tend to cut long. So because there's two of us and we're talking about around 2,000 hours of footage.
And you're both editing simultaneously?
Yeah, we usually sit in a room together, and and we're both
separate computers though.
Separate computers, and then which can be really. It's funny because it can be really efficient for quick ideas, quick hey, what do you think of this? And then sometimes really inefficient because you're constantly telling somebody's in a rhythm and you're like, hey, what do you think of this? Hey, talk to me through this stuff. So But I think the intention is at least one person the intent usually is at least one person to get their eyes on all the footage. We quickly realized, given our schedule, that was not going to happen. Dan like plowed through like the first 600 hours or something like that and made like detailed notes. And then we were like, we have to cut a little quicker. we're coming on, we're getting close to the deadline. So once that happened, we realized the combination of us, we did bring in another editor, and then the rest of the research team and our lead researcher and our AE, and like we had a pretty tight, probably the core team was like six people. Mm-hmm. Amidst all of us, we can get all of our eyes on all the footage. So everyone should take notes if there's something that just might feel special. For the most part, we familiarized ourselves with the basic tenets of what was in there, basic content. But usually we cut long so that when we present kind of potential of where a scene can go, we can all kind of get our eyes on it. What's the best selects of this moment in time? And then if that's, so like take that 45-minute sequence from the verdict to the beating of Reginald Denny, then we can kind of all weigh in on how to maybe shape it. And then the shaping is a little bit more, it's a combination of feeling, what's repetitive, and it's almost like there's a facet of it that's, you're also looking at, this is terrible to say this when you're working with non-actors, but you're looking at performance. Two people might be saying the same thing, but the way in which someone emotes, for lack of better terms, their performance in saying this thing just is much more visceral. And that's when Dan talks about like some of his intuition and what feels right. I'm going to cut out the other one. And then do I want to follow it up with something that's equally strong in emotion? Probably not. I need to give the audience a breather and then come back up. So a lot of it's very rhythmic. It's very kind of fluid, and it is, as long as you're thinking about a lot of things, doing it responsibly, making sure the information is there, making sure the right context in which you're viewing the material is there. And this is for every clip, not just like, a 5-minute scene. Every clip, we think through all these things. So
how one clip relates to the one preceding it and the one after.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why it's kind of, when Dan says it's like, some of it's just a feeling, like, it is. You're thinking through all these things, and eventually you come out on the other end, and it's like, okay, does this feel right after we've put it through this tremendous amount of filters?
Well, I was curious, what were some of the most surprising sources you found for getting this footage? Because some was home video, some was from news. It was sort of a variety, from what I understand.
Most surprising? You mean like
were you guys sort of digging through, finding people who lived in the area who may have had home video footage, or going to unexpected sources?
I mean, the most surprising thing to me was, and it maybe shouldn't have been, but was the police archives. So like the police had 2 videographers that were filming during the whole experience.
Was that just for their own internal use?
I think so. I mean, like you watch a lot of the tapes are like them going around filming looters' license plates and then filming them. So I'm sure they were collecting evidence, which, we unfortunately got that stuff kind of late, because I think there could have been a really, this idea of video journalism to expose, but then it also being flipped over, the ubiquitousness of video cameras to be able to use as evidence against people. But yeah, that stuff was surprising. That they filmed like crime scenes. That's there's several. And in a moment we show like the human toll of it, and actually show some of the dead bodies, and that's all from the police video, and that was just buried in the city archives. Like they had the police and fire internal media division had made a documentary about the experience to show. I'm assuming to show to like cadets and stuff like that. It was obviously very slanted towards the police, but there was, they had a lot of material there, and then this happened to be all of the raw tapes that they used, and it was just sitting in a box at the city archives, and that was part of our Ben Piner, who was our one of our producers and led all of the archival research. Like he basically showed the city archivist how to digitize a VHS tape. I think we bought him a thing so he could like digitize these things and send files to us. Which is funny because then there was other projects that really benefited them, because then they could go to the city archives and they're like, oh, I know how to do this, after we had kind of like done the initial work to make that happen. But yeah, that was the one that, I mean, there's people's home video stuff, but like,
there's also a lot of stuff that didn't make it. I think that there's a lot of moments like, so there's a moment when older Korean woman is she's actually protecting her friend's store, but in the film it plays as if she's protecting her own store. And she's kind of guarding this broken window, and there's kind of like a sea of men, one of which trying to get in to loot it, and she keeps saying, this is America, and there's this kind of like really dynamic like conflicted conversation happening between a Korean woman, Latino gentleman, black dude, and then like an Eastern European guy, and she's saying, this is America, you can't come in here. Another guy saying like, go home, send all the Latino dudes tell all the Chinese should go home. She's like, I'm not Chinese. She's telling him, you can't come in here. This other guy's saying like, well, if this is America, how come you can't come in? And it was such a very disheartening yet comedic,
almost surreal in a way.
Surreal reflection of what she's saying. This is America. What is happening right in front of the camera? So it's moments like that, and that was a CNN clip that I don't know if the clip had ever been broadcast in its entirety. In fact, I don't know if it ever actually was broadcast versus it was just a raw piece that was just. So I think there was a lot of gems where, if anything, that says a little bit about how you package news stories, not recognizing kind of how much this moment played out in its raw form probably says a lot more about us as a society than a prepackaged, broadcasted, CNN piece trying to wrap their head around the civil unrest.
Yeah, because it makes you look at broadcast journalism in a different way, because all the stories are slanted to a very specific agenda of what they're trying to make the narrative out to be. And did you find that looking at a lot of archive material that it was edited in a way initially for TV that may have been a little off kilter in a sense of what the events were?
I mean, I think there's two things. One, the way you preface that question, we knew that like there's bias in the news media, so it was really important to us to have the moments with the journalists getting ready to go on the air, so that you could, one big theme of this film is facade, like the facade of the American multicultural society, that the facade that there's no class in America, but one of those other facades is this like journalistic notion of the broadcast media that like
objective,
that they're objective, and that the calmness sometimes with which they're getting ready, and then they come on the air and it's like, oh my god, this is, or vice versa, it's really crazy and they come on, well, John, so it was really important to us to indicate that to the audience. In terms of looking at the way those things were packaged together, I was surprised at how little we've evolved in that. If anything, it's maybe gotten worse through the kind of 24-hour news cycle, where it's become more and more like entertainment and less actual news reporting. I think you saw a lot of like ignorance, cultural ignorance on the behalf of the news media, like really simplistic notions of communities, and like just blanketed statements of like, well, this area is like this, and it's like, what? How can you use this? Like, that's 50,000 people that live there. How could you say that they are all the same? But yeah, there was a lot of that, like dumbing things down to really digestible ideas.
Yeah, I gotta think about that one a little bit longer. Yeah, because it was complicated for us because we also knew that, like, how do you make sure that the audience knows that this is one POV and also just another community amidst all the other communities that you're exploring the events through, but also it's going to be you have to vacillate between them recognizing this facade, as Dan mentioned, but at the same time, when we need to get pertinent information out from a story standpoint, guess who we're relying on, right? So I think, I think the biggest surprise for us was the cultural bias from a dominant culture not seemingly so disconnected from what is happening in certain communities within a city that they're supposed to be kind of the journalists on behalf of the stories of these communities that live within these cities. Like the consistency of being so disconnected from these stories and these realities, specifically, let's just say, of South LA. But then the film starts in 65 watts, and going through a lot of that footage, there's probably better reporting and better journalism, but still a very distinct ocean between the person who's reporting on behalf of this community and what they're going through in the community themselves, and that it was the same thing. There's just such a disconnect, and that was the beginning of us, or not the beginning, but one of the many things we recognize in terms of the other dominant theme in the film is the kind of cyclical nature of not just the events, but how we assess them, how we report on them, how we analyze them. But in recognizing how that hadn't changed much from 65, if anything, the journalism got worse in 92.
Because it was much more geared toward entertainment than today, obviously.
Yeah,
in the sewer.
And entertainment and talk about, the thing we didn't want to do was be provocative sakes, and sometimes, you capture something on film, and even if the journalist is saying these are horrific images, that there's just something kind of feels off, and when in that presentation, because it feels like they know they've got a good news story, right? Because the imagery is provocative. So, but that's a total tangent. But the thing that really stood out to us is the very almost the parallels and the specificity of not just the reporting but the events themselves in 65, and that's what one of the reasons we opened in 65 watts and in 92 is that's really started speaking to us in terms of one of the dominant themes being cyclical, and that's kind of what you start to experience over the course of the film, and then we end it in a very, very deliberately.
And you go back to one of the quotes from the 65 watts coverage, which I thought was very powerful.
Yeah.
I was curious because you guys had ideas for what the music score would be at the beginning. Now, collaborating with a composer, I don't know if either of you, do you have like a deep understanding of writing music, or like what do you feel like is the best way to communicate with a composer and really get your ideas across if you're trying to get them to change something or to do something specific?
I think it's fun. Me and TJ are just, we both, not that I'm super musically inclined, but we were both in bands when we were younger. Music is just a huge, huge, huge part of our life. And we're probably deep down inside wish we were musicians. And I think in working with composers, when we have very specific musical ideas, I think one thing we've had to learn is to not try to be overly specific and trust that you are hiring somebody because they are really good at what they do, and you.
So you would never go to a point of saying use a violin, use a piano.
No, you do sometimes, but I think it's, it's also, it's about creating that right relationship and trust and communication. Because like, if the first thing you say to a composer is, "Hi, I want you to do my film. Now I want it to be a violin right here," then it's like it's taking all of their agency out of it, and it's like, why would they? They want to be creative too. They want to bring their own ideas, and that's the language that they speak in. So for us, I think in the past films, we maybe gave too much, like right from the top, instead of saying, "Here it is." And with Danny and Sonder, it was like we sent them stuff. They would reply back basically with what their instincts were, and when their instincts were in line with what we were feeling, anyways, we really didn't give them. We just give them encouragement. And then when something would come in that was it's not even that it wasn't, all of their music is good. It's whether or not it's fitting the correct tone. So like, there's a few spaces where maybe their music was too in line with the imagery that you were seeing, and we really needed it to juxtapose to it. For instance, if they went too heavy in strings, in an emotional moment, it would betray the approach of the film.
It's just indicating what you're seeing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To me, it's then you get to a point where like, man, what would it sound like if we did? Then you can talk about instrumentation and.
Yeah, it's like you talk about it when, like, if this is only if you're working with a trusted composer. You can talk about instrumentation when you're problem solving.
Yeah.
Right. Until then, like Dan said, you want to give them their own autonomy to like bring.
Let them interpret the material their own way.
With the guided help, because we cut ourselves and we're music people. We're already cutting sequences to music beds, and we have an idea of how it should flow.
So you have temp scores in there.
Temp scores, and you see it in some composers we've worked with where. They don't want to hear the temp score. They just want to see the scene, how it's built out. And some just want to see where's your head at. What have you been listening to? And that kind of gives them just at least a loose direction, and also gives them an opportunity to say, I see what you're doing here, but think about this. But I think if you're working with a great composer, you're not. You want to be as least prescriptive as possible when it comes to the tools that they are using. You want to be more about like, what is the intention of the scene? Mm-hmm. What's the feeling you're trying to evoke? You don't want to be like, I need a spike here versus, here's a little mini emotional climax in the middle of this. Can we kind of like, take advantage of that and let them determine how they're going to take advantage of it musically. Yeah. And then what's cool is if you're, again, this only works if you're talking to someone who's like an awesome composer who does their job well. And then you get to the point where you've built that trust because they're right in line with you. Then it's all the problem solving stuff at the end where the trust is there, the communication is there, and then they trust you when you're suggesting like, you know what, maybe the violin is the thing drowning this out. Let's just go with piano. And they might be like, oh yeah, that's interesting. We'll try that. We'll give that a shot. And that's usually closer to the end. The other thing we'll do is, and you have to work with a composer who's willing to give you your own. Who has to trust you in your own kind of what you see in your own film and in their work, which is we'll just be like, you know what, that the piece is awesome. It's not working for the scene. We're going to place it in another scene, and that happens all the time, constantly. And
Danny and Sonder love that too.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
they're actually like there's some composers that do not like you taking something and placing it in another place.
Because in their mind it's only meant for that one
they've
area.
done it for that. I don't know the reasons. I mean, to me it's like, why not? Like, find what works. It's all living in the same world. You're all inspired by the same little constraints of what this film is, so why not see? And you find crazy, like,
great stuff.
Yeah, stuff you would never expect. And yeah, I mean, it's, but they are so, I don't know, they're just so good at what they do that
they make it easy.
Yeah. And we just had tremendous rapport with them right from the beginning. And so it was a very relaxed. I mean, we sent them an email in December, saying we're making a film that we basically want to create a symphony for.
Yeah. And you guys
So
premiered at Tribeca in April, right?
Yeah. So they wrote back. We were like, this is a very ambitious idea. We're gonna want like 100 minutes of music for a 110-minute film, and we have to lock picture in the middle of February. So they created this in like 6 weeks. It was insane.
Really cool.
Yeah, they were like great. While doing other projects, like, I mean, they're extremely prolific, but they're just like, yeah, we speak a very, very similar language. So that was I think one of the great things that we'll be able to take forward from this project is our relationship with them. Yeah. They're really, really.
One of the cool things about them is they are, they're musicians themselves, so they will watch a scene and play along to it, loop that, play another piece, either another instrument or another iteration of the composition to the actual scene, so you're not getting like MIDI tracks back and being like, now imagine what the real violin will sound like. You're actually getting a much closer feel of what the scene's gonna feel like.
Because they're interpreting the instrument and writing
some weird MIDI interpretation of what it could be.
So, there's places where we went back to the original temp recording that they did on a single violin, as opposed to having the quartet or whatever, however many strings they ended up recording with. Just because we liked the sound of the single violin in places. Yeah. But yeah, and I mean, just not to obviously talking about them a lot because we're huge fans, but they also, I mean, we use some of their scores from other films as temp music, but then we also like used
I love how much they hate that.
Yeah.
Now we do something different.
But we also used there's a lot of Arvo Part in there and other classical pieces that they are classically trained. Well, at least Danny went through a lot of classical training as a cellist. So but their breadth of classical music is so wide that they hear those things and they're like, oh, that is denoting a kind of religious tone and feel and idea. That would be interesting for us to explore religious themes and ideas in the music, and that stuff we would never be able to pick up
using
on
that as a metaphor
just even the
material.
sounds, like they there's a few different themes in the film, and one of the main chord progressions of one of the main themes are this chord progression that they were explaining to us. If you like played this in music school, your professor would throw you out of class. Like, there are things that should not go together, but it works so perfectly. It's such an unsettling feeling to have these chord progressions, and it's Sandra was saying, it's like there's different composers who have used that kind of idea, and like a lot of films that have that similar chord progression because it makes you unsettled.
As a directing team, how have you guys developed over the years? Has it always been sort of clear what your jobs are on a given film in a sense, or sort of how you divide things up, or do you feel like you're kind of one brain in a way, if that makes sense?
Definitely a lot of one brain action going on.
Yeah, it is, and we're never good at answering this question.
Well,
because like there is,
fluid.
I don't. It's like, I think when you were saying in one thing, it's like I don't even know that we think of ourselves.
Like, is there ever a lot of conflicts between you guys, or
no?
No.
I mean, there's like heated.
More like healthy debate.
Yeah, but you get frustrated. Like you can get frustrated like with anybody, or you get really tied to an idea.
Yeah.
There's also there's a lot of shit wrapped up in, like, you might have an idea and then your insecurities play out when TJ comes in and he's like, that's no good, and then I'm like, what are you talking about? it's so good. And then like, you know, if I take a break and walk in and like, you know, and see it, I'm like, oh, it's not any good. And that's, you have to have, I think if anything, we've developed the trust that like, oh, we work together for a reason. So if TJ's like, that sucks, I'm like, oh, okay, that's why I'm with you. I don't need to argue it. Like, you're my eyes in that way, and vice versa. But like, TJ has described it as like, we're more of a creative partnership than like a directing team, because we don't have like, it's not like he's the goalie and I'm the forward. Like, you know, we just, it's like we enter a project and like sometimes one of us is taking the lead on something because we have a really clear idea of what it should be. Yeah. And then other times it's the other way around. Other times it's both of us see the exact same thing and we are of one brain, and it's like, you know, get the fuck out of our way, let us just do this.
Well, I think the benefit of being in a directing team is that you have that immediate feedback of an idea. It's not you isolated and then you're going to the producer or somebody else who's on the project. You know, you can improve things quicker because there isn't that kind of political filter. You guys are together. You know, you can say anything you want to each other.
That to me is I've said to people often, like, and maybe this says more about my personality or something, but like as a solo director, it would be really, you're in such a vulnerable place because everyone expects you to know the answer all of the time. You can't really show a sign of weakness because that could filter out throughout your entire crew.
And all the other departments could crumble under that in a way.
And so you always have to look like you know exactly, but that's impossible. It's a stupid idea that anybody can actually know what they're doing. And so to have, you know, TJ and we can pull each other aside and be like, do you know what to fucking do here? I'm like, no, I don't know. Like, okay, well, should we do this? Yeah, let's do that. And you can, it gives you a space to actually be vulnerable amongst a position where you oftentimes can't show that vulnerability, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I think that even though it might be semantics, but thinking about it more like a creative team and not like a directing duo is so much of it is like for us talking about the thing, the project, the scene, the clip for way too long over coffee is working. That's a facet of work because our brains are actually filtering through and navigating what we want the thing to be, and then then we can kind of go in each other's own spaces and make the thing. It's weird. It's the I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to talk about the process because it's literally process.
Yeah. It's very instinctual.
It's kind of instinctual.
I also creatively, I have a hard time like being on my own. Like there's something about the process of riffing with somebody and having somebody there to be like, well, what about this? That energizes me, and then you start building ideas. Whereas like if I'm sitting by myself, I'm like, what about this? There's one idea.
And then you're waiting to share that idea with somebody. Like, will they like it? Will they not?
Yeah, exactly. And there's no build. It's harder to. I find for me at least, it's harder to build. It's harder to like get more and more creative because there's nobody challenging that. Well, what if it was this? Well, what if it was this? Well, what if it was that? And
that's probably the big thing.
Yeah,
I think part of that trust is not just is this good or is this bad. Part of that trust is, say Dan did something and I might think it's fucking great, but my first thing, unless we're in rhythm and it's like awesome, move on, next thing, part of it is like, have you thought of this? Like challenging it in the right way.
Yeah.
So how do we make this thing that you made that's fucking awesome, but how do we make it even awesomer?
Yeah.
And that is just all rooted in trust. So if anything, I think we've been working together for 10 years now. If anything, I think that the trust is getting solidified in terms of like, I'm not going to second guess his instincts, when he's not quite tapped into something. I might have to work harder to convince him why I think it is, but the reason I'm working harder to convince him is because I trust why he's having a hesitation or and I could still be wrong. His instincts might be right.
But just having that conversation improves everything
gets
along
you
the
thinking.
Yeah.
It doesn't give you doubt. It actually gets you thinking deeper about the material, and that only works if it's with someone with a trusted source. If we were working solo and I was having this conversation with a producer who is more of a typical producer type and not a creative type, I might just be like, well, I'm the director, so I'm creatively smarter, so this is going, But so it only works if there's trust. So yeah, I think that's been really cemented over the years.
Now, if you look at this 10-year span that you guys have been working together, have you guys always been consistent in terms of what projects you want to pursue, what projects you're passionate about, and at this point after LA92, do you know what you want to do next?
I definitely think our in terms of our things that we're drawn to or what we want to do, that has evolved, and I feel like our partnership is starting to take on its own identity of what our partnership wants to do together. Like, because we have, like, as a Venn diagram, we have a shit ton of overlap, but we're not two circles on top of each other, we're a Venn diagram. So, like, there are things that that we both are attracted to that maybe the other is not as much, but like, and so I think that earlier on is, why maybe we would vacillate. Like, I don't think our partnership is rooted in like comedy in any way, shape, or form, but like, I have a comedy background. We both like humor, so we leaned maybe some ways in there, but have found the little space where like, what kind of comedy or humor works for us together, in terms of like style, that's or design. Like, I would say TJ it leans more in that than I do, but we have found a great space where like where that style and narrative sense can live together, where it's satisfying both of those things. So and then just subject matter is I think and then in terms of what is next.
If it were up to me, LA92 would just be 110 minutes of just glitches. Really cool glitch and music.
And then I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to.
It's interesting. I mean, documentaries, unlike narrative films, I mean, it's years of research, years of development, years of finding footage of putting the movie together. So, I mean, is that...
Well, also, like, we get really singularly focused. So, like, we're not, like, how the fuck, like, Michael Winterbottom, right? Is that like, puts out a new movie every year. Like, I just don't get that. I could never... You either have to have... Like,
or you look at Alex Gibney, who does 2-3 a year sometimes.
But, like, Alex, I understand his process. Like, he's got a team of people that he trusts. He is a writer, so he writes, there's a somewhat of a journalistic background, so like I can actually see how that he is leading the ship, and there is a big amount of momentum behind him to be able to get those things done. Our process is extremely different. Like, we consume ourselves in the thing that we're working on, and that becomes, to the detriment of our outside life, that just becomes our life. So then when we like emerge from that, it's very difficult to be like, we haven't thought about it.
It's like you've been in a cave for years, now you're coming out and see sunlight again.
And you have to like, I remember I think you had sent this to me years ago. Spike Jonze did an interview kind of talking about this same thing, and he, if I remember correctly, like described it as like input and output periods. Like when you're making a film, it's all output. Like you're just like creating something and like you exhaust every bit of your output. And then you need, coming out of that, you need time to just input. Like read books that you haven't had a chance to read. Like, get inspired by things that you didn't have time to get inspired by. But yet there's this weird moment that you have when a film comes out that everybody wants to know what you're doing next. So you have all of these relationships that are being built, but you don't have anything to really do with it. So it's a strange. That's like the moment we're in right now. Going to meet like.
Everybody.
Yeah, executive at a studio who's like, I want to make your next movie. What do you guys want to do? It's like.
It's not that we don't have ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's no tangible, there's no like, for example, one thing for us is neither of us went to film school. We're both self-taught. Documentaries was very accessible. That's how we both learned how to shoot, cut on other people's projects, on our own small things. I shot music videos for a while up in Seattle. But doesn't mean that we just only want to do documentaries. So for us, it's how do you big thing after Undefeated was like, don't get pigeonholed into being just like doc guys. And so we went out and did the whole dance of trying to get attached to a scripted film and kind of learn that world, and then kind of went back to docs. But the big thing is it's a weird balance that I don't feel like a lot of people talk about, since we're talking about process. It's a weird balance of staying true to your voice and what you want to put out in the world and what kind of projects you want to immerse yourself into, but like making sure that you don't fall off the train too far, so that people.
So you have to kind of strategize in a way. Yeah.
You're strategizing, but it doesn't always. There's no equation for it. It doesn't really. Because the other big variable that I think a lot of people don't really talk about is, at least for us, is you go hard on a project for like a long stretch of time, and then the thing comes out, and then you go hard on press, especially in the doc space, right? Because you are the face and the voice of the
there's no actors or anything to
right? So
talk
you're
about,
you're out talking about the film. Everything's about this film. You deliver this baby, and then it just stops. You don't go to another project. It just stops. You just this cliff, and you fall off that cliff, and you have this huge like postpartum, because everything's done, and you may have had stuff you were developing before you entered in that project, but going back to that stuff is like, where was I?
Yeah.
This is a half-baked idea. We pitched on it at one point, and so you kind of have to get first of all, emotionally, you have to come back to like living in real life again, your life, and then you have to face the business side of things, which is like, what are you doing next? I need to know now. And you're kind of like, well, I don't know, because I just made a film.
So you guys have been under that what are you doing next pressure for the last few months in a way.
Yeah.
It's also just really hard to like.
This sounds like a lot of complaining.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
we're in the fucking most privileged position in the world, and it's not complaining. It's just but it is the experience. Like.
But I think people have like an interpretation that just because you make a film doesn't mean it's easy to make the next film.
Yeah.
It's
well,
one
you also
leads to
know
the other all the
more.
time.
You also know more, so you know what you're getting into. So this week I've been staring at my computer, trying to write one page of this treatment that we have for this project. It should be the simplest, easiest thing, and I can't do it. And like. Part of it, I think, is you know what it means to like, oh God, if this like goes, then I have to go through that again.
Yeah, years.
There's like this almost like self-sabotage of like, don't do it. But then there's also just like, it's purely like trying to work at least for me, like getting your mental space to the place where you can get excited, because you're just fucking drained.
Yeah.
And I, I was trying on this to like just ride the wave, like go like don't take any time off because like maybe, but then like we took some time off and now I'm like it's so hard to get back into the like movement. But
partly this because there's just not a concrete. It's hard to get back into the movement of choosing the thing that is going to be pitched. Right, not the like. Here is a concrete job, right? The thing that's going to be pitched because you're going to put a lot of energy into this pitch. That is just not even a 50-50. It's like a 10% chance of it going, right? So then it's like, what do you want to start that over? How many times are you going to do that over and over and over again?
But when you guys go to pitch, do you say, well, I have these 3 pitches I can give you, or do you just focus on one?
Oh, just one. And when we say pitch, we're like.
Like if
this that we're talking about, like we just have like some doc series that we think would be interesting that we would be more producers on. In terms of films, that is like that's a whole nother thing. Like when we had a couple that were like studio projects that were for hire. Meaning like it was an open project in their
open directing assignment kind of thing.
And one of them it was us and then the eventual director, and the movie went on to make like $500 million. And it's really we spent a ton of time like that's where you're going in. You're spending a ton of time pitching your vision for the film, and that's a job within itself. Like
an unpaid job.
Yeah, you're not. Yeah, and you're making all of these materials. Like it's become, I think. I don't know what it was like 20 years ago, but I can't imagine people were cutting together mood reels and like making boards and like.
Yeah, I heard like the last Spider-Man movie. I think 5, 6, maybe even 10 directors were pitching on that for months and months and months, not getting paid, and then they finally picked the person.
Yeah,
so
it's a crazy process, and then to know that like then you get down, it's like you and somebody else. And like it's days of them going back and forth in a room, and you're like, oh, like at one point that means we were being, like we were the front runners. Then maybe it should be that person. And
I mean, it makes sense if you are on the other side. If you're from a business standpoint, it makes total sense. It is. I think this is for myself. It's hard to make that commitment. Knowing that it's going to take a tremendous amount of time, and at the end of it, if you don't get it, you don't have a piece of work to show for it. You just have this pitch. That's not you didn't, for not to sound pretentious, you didn't make art in the fucking pitch. You made a pitch. You're selling something, and the other thing is for us that straddled is kind of like, because we also shoot commercials, so like we straddle a lot of different spaces. For us that aren't just like solely, I think it might be easier if we were just doing documentaries. Because I think our brain space would be a little bit more focused. But because we straddle all these different spaces, when we get off of a doc, you don't have the financial capacity to just, or the prowess to just say, I'm going to take 3-4 months, curate the next idea, or really just dive into this one pitch. And I don't think a lot of people talk about that, specifically in the doc space.
Yeah, because not to be too detailed, but I guess documentary salaries for directors, at least from what I've found out through the process too, it's not as much as narrative in this way. So.
No.
And again, we're also in a privileged place in that, like we get paid pretty well comparatively. But still, it's not like you
doesn't once you're finished with the project, it doesn't afford you this even if it's critically acclaimed, no matter what it is, it doesn't necessarily afford you the time. It's really time. It's done wonders for us, like in terms of opening up doors and building out relationships, but it doesn't afford you the time to continue to curate at the level in which you desire to, right? In terms of what your own expectations are of your own work. So
was that Louis C.K. at the Oscars?
I don't know.
That was
like
only one winner is driving home in a fucking beat up Hyundai, and like it's so fucking true. Like we won our Oscar. I went back to my shitty apartment in Koreatown, and like bunch of unpaid parking tickets and like, you know, great, I've got this, like, you know, and obviously that moment then after some time did change our trajectory. But
so from a business perspective, after winning an Academy Award or having a film that has a lot of recognition to it, I mean, are you being told by certain, like, you have to strategize, like you have to kind of
I think it just depends on what you want to do. I mean, and figuring out how you want to exist in the business that you're in. Like, you know, we definitely could have like cashed in and been maybe more like strategic about our business decisions and like, you know, there were definitely opportunities thrown at us, and if you're really savvy, you know, you could probably like on a business side, and that's what you care about, you could really take advantage of that. We're not motivated by that, and I think, you know, that's another thing that we've learned is like that game it's not exciting to us, and so we need to like
game in the work too.
Yeah,
I mean not.
It just we work when we're working. We have to like love the thing that we're doing, because for me like,
and that's going to make the film better at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So
it's
working
also,
on something you're not passionate about, you're not in all the way.
Yeah, I also don't know how to work any other way. Like I would be scared to death to like be given some shitty script and be like, go direct this, and like our real talent, I think, is that we do like really, it's the passion that we're gonna have for the thing, not the like, oh, I know exactly how to set up, you know, how to cover this, and let's get our pickups over here and moving on, everybody. Like, you know, like the kind of more general style of directing, of like, you know, running the ship, I guess. But that's, you know.
I think the hard thing too is you know, after Undefeated, the type of, even though it created a bridge into the narrative space for us, just because it feels like you almost forget you're watching a documentary. The type of stuff that were coming at us were sports films and like, you know, YA, like, oh, you guys work with teenagers and sports, and so it was like kind of Disney centric kind of feelings of,
yeah.
And I guess I kind of get it, but you're also looking at that, and that's when Dan's saying like, if we were business savvy maybe, but at the same time you're thinking about like, but that's not really what I'm attracted to creatively. I would never go out of my way to do that, so why would I do it now all of a sudden? And you're still, you want to, as pretentious as it sounds, you want to preserve the integrity of your brand, and the hope of doing that is you actually have a career that spans many years, and you're not a fad for 7-8 years, and then that fad runs out of steam, and like, what did you make these kind of like cookie cutter films?
Yeah. That's why sometimes it's better just to wait and just to find that right.
Yeah, but it's really, yes,
yeah.
But it's hard to learn. Not to belabor this point, and this is like becoming a therapy session for us at this point.
That's
but
great.
Like,
what are you talking about?
But like, when you're in the middle of it, again, that insecurity of like, oh, am I fucking up? Am I like wasting opportunities? Like, we had a producer, we kept passing on like stuff, and to the frustration of our representation and then many producers. And we had this producer.
Yeah, we're not making any money for our reps.
Yeah. We had this producer who's multiple winning Academy Award producer, big guy deal. He was a huge fan of Undefeated, and he was like determined to make a movie with us. So he kept sending us scripts, but we just didn't respond to them. And like, people are like, are you know, crazy? Like this dude sending, just like, say yes, just do it, like figure it out. And we're like, yeah, but I don't know, I don't like it. And then after the third script that he'd sent us or something, you know, we called our agent and we're like, yeah, you know, we're not feeling it. And then we get like a call like back like 2 minutes later. So-and-so wants to talk to you directly. We're like, oh, okay. Like, you know, we're thinking like, we've had a bunch of meetings with this guy, like it's cool. And, you know, so put it on speaker. We're like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, you guys are fucking blowing it. And we're like, what? He's like, you're fucking blowing it. He's like, you had a window that was wide open, and if it's not shut already, it's super close to being shut. And we're like, okay, well, we don't like any of the stuff. Like, I don't know what to tell you. But, like, that was, like, you know, you hear that from somebody who's had a shit ton of success. You're like, oh, God, like, are we fucking up? Like, is this... And it took a while, I think, then for us to go, oh, wait, what got us here was that we just did the things that we wanted to do, and we need to get back to just doing that. And that's where, like, LA92, when that came to us, it was like,
Still
oh, God, this is, like, and this is, like, and we can make this the way that we want to make it, and so it was I mean, very, very helpful, I think, to return to this place of like, oh yeah, our instincts are going to be what guides us, and we have to trust those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the silver lining in all this is I feel like that by nature of, I mean, there's just so many platforms now for just content to exist that you can create your own model in that sense, and you don't actually have to. You haven't totally struck out if we didn't ride the wave of Undefeated, you know, and actually take a studio film or something like that.
No, the business is changing so much now.
It's changed so much.
Priorities.
But
it's so funny. Sorry. Yeah. Speaking of, because obviously people are interested in the, film here. Like 4 years ago, going around to studios, they're like. We were like, oh, we're kind of interested in making like mid-level dramas, like, 20 million, 15, 20 million dollars. Oh, those are dead. Nobody's making those anymore. You guys either got to do like super low budget, or you got to, do big superhero movie. Like, the mid-range dramas are dead. Now, just going out in the last few weeks and meeting with people, we're really looking for like $15 million, $20 million mid-range dramas. That's what everybody. And it's like, oh my god.
Well, after Manchester by the Sea, I think was like $50 million and above, straight drama. Nothing had permeated like that in so long.
Well, and
Amazon, La La Land,
Get Out. I mean, you have all of these like original ideas, and it's like, maybe trusting the instincts of the filmmakers to make personally driven like ideas will connect with people. But there's also, like having Netflix, Amazon, these places where you can find that audience in a way is also driving a lot of that. I mean, there's like business reasons that's happening too. But
the benefit of that, I think the idea is you can stop. I think it's naive to think that every creative person doesn't think about am I going to have an audience, right? Anyone who's like, no, man, I just immerse myself in my work. You're like, no, you're figuring out a way to pay your bills too. And you also want you want eyes on your material. Because half of what the process is, you live for the process, even when it's a love-hate thing that you're waking up dreading to go and dive back into the edit, but you're also like, this is part of it. This is part of the experience. Yeah. But the big payoff oftentimes for us is sitting in a theater and the engagement from just it works. You see people laugh, you see people cry, you see people just emote in different ways.
What was the experience of being at Tribeca with LA92 and having in front of an audience like that?
Tribeca felt like kind of an average festival experience. I think the more dynamic. There's a couple things that were more dynamic than Tribeca. Tribeca felt more like a launching point for a greater kind of purpose, and that was just to get it out, like announce it, get it out in the world. It was really well responded really well at Tribeca, but I think the more interesting dynamic screenings were, we did a series of these kind of word of mouth screenings that were specifically curated around screening at communities in which conversations of police misconduct and police misconduct itself is something that's kind of a day-to-day occurrence. So we're like Atlanta, Chicago, St. Louis, Baltimore, and and then we'd screen the film and we'd have Q&As that were less like talking about process, but like getting a little sense of where our heads were at, but that's still like opening it up to the audience to engage and share their own experiences. Those were incredible, and that was, I think, what we live for more is, and that's why it takes us so long to figure out what projects we're going to do, is because you want people to engage emotionally in the work, or that's the hope at least. And then within doing that, maybe it elicits kind of a greater conversation about either the subject matter or ourselves. Maybe we look at things differently. And then at the tail end of that, we had the LA premiere at the LACMA, and that was about 600 people deep. Had a great panel, but that was the biggest screening we had. And that was to screen in Los Angeles with people that from all walks of life that experienced Watts in 65. Some people experienced 92, some weren't even born then, and also from all over the city, to be, you just know when an audience is in it, and to be in it, but also like verbally talking to the screen, emoting, and for it seemed like all 600 to stay for a Q&A that was like a good, 45-minute Q&A, just like glued to what every panelist had to say. That's money can't really buy.
Because you're making the film for the audience. You're making it for them to have this impact, to have this engagement with the material.
Hey, you're making it for I feel like that's always a weird thing for me, because you can't deny that you're bringing a big part of yourself to the work, and you are selfishly like making distinct creative choices for yourself, but it doesn't mean that you're not thinking about the audience. Like at the end of the day, you don't want to lose them. And you're bringing them you're thinking about them as a variable while you're constructing it. They are absolutely in the back of your head as a part of the process, for me at least.
Yeah.
I just hear a lot of filmmakers that are like, you make it for yourself first.
Yeah.
But like that's, why? Yeah. So you look at it, watch it, and be like, yeah.
Why
awesome.
do you put it in theaters?
Pat yourself on the back and like.
I find the screenings that are the most like, I don't know, moving to me or whatever, that have the most impact on me, or what would be like the kind of fine cut screenings. Like once we get the film to a place where we think it, like people could watch it, but we don't know if it works. That's always and then to see something that you've, like Tisha's saying, you're doing all of these things, but you are in the back of your head thinking like, ultimately this has to make sense to people.
Yeah.
And
or how a certain moment will have an impact.
Exactly.
And how they'll react.
Yeah. And on this one in particular, because it was like on Undefeated, I remember we did almost like a test screening thing, and that was, that film is like kind of bread and butter documentary. Like it's not like we're doing anything crazy in that. But it was like, is this going to be able to transcend to the place that we want it? Like, is this going to be as affecting as we think it is? And then to see an audience go through the experience that we really wanted them to go through, that was like really moving. Like I got emotional at that way more than I did at like the premiere at South by Southwest or Toronto, or like those are all cool things, but like to me it was like, oh my God, this thing that we've spent all of this time on is actually working. And then on this, there was this like risk that we were kind of taking, like, will people follow it? Is it going to be too exhausting? Like, there's no character, like
you can't attach yourself to a character.
A lot of people we talked about on the outset doing it this way were like very like
discouraging.
Like
well, no.
yeah,
can't be done.
Yeah, can't be done, or well, good luck, so the first time that we screened it in a theater with like, it wasn't quite done, but it was like close, and we brought in just like everyday people and then to watch when the credits came up on the film, and it was like the most silent, like, hear a pin drop in the theater in the way that we wanted it to be. Like, people were like, what the fuck was that? You know, like, you could feel that we shocked them in the way that we wanted to. And then the conversation that came out of it afterwards was like, oh, awesome. Like, this works. So those are the screenings to me that are way more, that's what I care about more than like festival screenings or anything.
Yeah, festivals are, I mean, they can be fun, that I feel like they're, in terms of like a filmmaker experience, it's a little bit of a,
because it's not a regular audience, it's more of an
it's
industry
a festival audience.
Yeah.
You're not really always, this sounds super weird, but you're not engaging with real people. You're engaging with
Film fans.
Yeah. And
Which
to be quite frank, it can be really homogenous. I think the festival circuit is a certain type of person, a certain community, and that's awesome. And it's really in the same level that you want your peers to respect your work. It's really great to have that support from like a solid film base. But you want to, ideally with work, you want to transcend that. You want to get to the person that's like, I don't usually watch documentaries, but I watched your film and like it changed my life. That's infinitely more rewarding, because it's also selfishly you get something back from, whether it's just not what they said, but also the conversation. Maybe you engage with that person and you are reminding yourself a little bit of why you do the work. Anytime someone, even that they don't have to have an epiphany, but someone says like, it reminded me of this story in my life, or it brought up all these emotions that I had buried. You're just kind of like, I'm sorry that happened, and then they're like, no, it's a good thing. You're like, awesome.
Well, I think with LA92, so many people can look at these events in an abstract way, just reading about them.
Right.
But this film is just so immersive, and you're there, and you can understand from just a core emotional perspective what was happening and why people were feeling a certain way. And I think that creates a bridge between a lot of groups to understand why these events happened, and not just to judge it in a very stereotypical way.
Yeah, that's. There's two thoughts. It's funny you say that. One is the community that has responded extremely well to the film is like millennials, like anyone who's like 28, 25 and under. I guess that would be more than just millennials, but because it is like either they read a Wikipedia page or it's a little byline in a history book, they just had. And because we live in a day and age where a lot of information is consumed via video, like different different way of consuming content, right? And then not just reading articles. And that, we're speaking in a language, we're doing a history project and speaking in a visual language, but also doing it in a way that's not being guided through a quote unquote expert or something like that. Most people that age are like visibly shaken by it, partly because they know what's going on. They're in tune with what's happening now, not recognizing and having never recognized that there are so many similarities in terms of policy, in terms of how there's a consistent severe miscommunication between communities at risk and communities that are kind of suffering through a socioeconomic plight that is just the fucking same. And I think that like just like shook them and then to have that information and then to see the trajectory of it coming down to a place of like basically a city on fire and people getting murdered was just kind of I think blew a lot of their minds. And there's a screening we did in, was it Atlanta? There was a gentleman who was probably in his mid-70s who was like a local, he owned like a music store, and I guess his family has a history of being like a local business owners in the community. But he stood up. He was the first person to stand up, and he was like, "All you young people in this audience, the way you feel right now, this is the way your parents felt. This is the way their parents felt. This is the way their grandparents felt. This is the way their great grandparents felt. And now you know when we're talking, what we've been talking about over the course of these years, in terms of inequity, in terms of injustice, in terms of racism, and that it just kind of tied it all together, like this idea that we're having the same conversation. Things might be slightly different in terms of technology or whatever it might be, but we're still having the core foundation of this country is still kind of having the same conversation that we can't seem to get past.
Yeah. I think it's important to acknowledge that we're still at that point, that we haven't grown as much as we thought we had.
Yeah.
Well, how can everybody check out the film? Is it still on Nat Geo on demand?
I believe it's still on demand. I think it's on Hulu for sure. You can rent it on iTunes and
It's on Amazon?
on Amazon as a rental as well. But if you have Hulu, it's streaming on there, and then it's gonna expand into other streaming services. Those details are being worked out.
Cool.
But yeah, it's out there.
Well, thank you guys for taking the time.
Yeah.
I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you for
this is a lot of fun.